Thank you, Kathy. Good morning. I am a grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon and Alateen. My name is Ashley.
Hi, Ashley.
Oh, that feels so good. I love that. By the way, there's a phone here with the timer, and you really shouldn't leave me unattended, because I might just change that time, take all the time I want. I finally got a bunch of people to listen to me. Little lost child growing up in an alcoholic family system, and y'all gonna pay attention. When I say the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon and Alateen, for me that's very personal. I recently counted, and I've had the great pleasure and fun of attending meetings in 10 countries. Al-Anon is alive and well, and in India they work the program one day at a time. And they practice the principle of detachment. And detachment is neither kind nor unkind. It does not mean criticism or judgment of the person or thing from which we are detaching. I am so excited to be here. I was asked almost a year ago, and the fact that I'm here in and of itself is a tribute to my love for Al-Anon and Alateen, because I really only do what I want to do when I want to do it, and I only want to be treated as special and different when it suits me. So the fact that I would be asked to do something for which I wasn't going to get paid over a year ago and I showed up is a direct result of sponsorship. Damn it! And I have been so well sponsored, and I'll probably refer to all these names, and you won't know many, from Marla, from Sarah Leah, from Maureen. They're all just a bunch of M's, and they taught me how to quit being a martyr, how to quit mothering, and all those M things that we learn in a fourth step in the Al-Anon family groups. Thank you, Polly, for asking, and thank you for Lee, who's a taper. I always attend the Music City Roundup. And he and I were visiting last year, and he asked if I ever told my story, and ironically, I tell my story a lot, and I do it in public spaces. This is my first time to be asked at an event like this, and somehow all of that came together, and now I have the privilege and pleasure of your company, so thank you very much. And I've very much enjoyed getting to know Kathy. We have all kinds of outside issues in common. Oh my God, they're very exciting. We're walking the dog, and I'm like, whoa, I can't say any of that from the podium in Tradition 10. And I love how she just kind of threw in there, oh yeah, there was law school along the way. And those are the kinds of things that I've also been blessed with in my recovery. And I want to start, if I can, by the way, I've made a decision, right? I've made the most important decision I will ever make in my entire born life. I have made the decision to turn my will and my life. I am not done yet, damn you people. What's that time? There's a timer going off. I have made the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God. And as a result, whatever happens today is really none of my business. My service is to show up. If one person hears what she needs to hear, great. The rest of you can take a little nap. And by the way, if you're new, keep coming back. It does get better. And if you don't have a higher power of your understanding, hi, Raven. It's so good to see you. You can borrow my higher power. It's a cat. It's supposed to be a joke. You're distracted by Raven. I'm distracted by Raven, too. She doesn't have on copious amounts of purple, which is her color, that I can see. Yes, there's the purple. Thank you. So Raven and I go to meetings together in Franklin, Tennessee. I do have a home group, by the way, and I have so many little stories that I could tell, and who knows, as I said, which one will come out. I just hope that they're useful to somebody. One of my stories is that I have a wonderful home group now. It is called the 12 Steps to Freedom. It is a women's study group. We look at all three of Al-Anon's legacies, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts of service. Yeah, baby. Oh yeah, we're going to rock the concepts. We're going to go to the general warranties at the conference, people. Oh yeah. Because today, as you know, we have these things, they're not exactly promises in likelihood. In Al-Anon, I call them the likelihoods, because promises would require a special stature in the Al-Anon family groups. And we have our program, which is the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts of service. We have the slogans. We have conference-approved literature, sponsorship, and service. That is the program. We also have the fellowship, which is the we, the first word and the first step, all of us here together. And I don't know why I just got so distracted. Maybe it's because I'm lecturing. But, and a home group. So this home group, we study paths to recovery. And I previously had a home group and I broke up with it. And there were some reasons for me that were compelling to do that. And maybe I'll tell you that story and maybe I won't. But the moral of the story is a home group is a place where I've really let people get to know me. And that's what I hope to do today a little bit, is just let you get to know me. And it's also a place where I have gotten to know people and I have really experienced, like experientially lived, that the world is much bigger than my family of origin. And that I have a home sweet home in the Al-Anon family groups. So what my life is like today is that in your book, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I understand in step 10, it's mentioned as part of your promises that we can go to the most sordid places on earth. And that is something I do quite literally, and it's something that I love and that I enjoy. And my service work has become something that really feeds my soul, and it's very humbling. So today I go to war zones, and I go to brothels, and I go to hospices and slums, and not just those places inside my own heart, because that's really how I lived before I got here. And I've been able to go to graduate school. I went to a school, you know, it's a big fancy school in the Northeast. It starts with an H, and I never thought my name and Harvard would go in the same sentence. And not only do they go in the same sentence, and I would never share this kind of stuff from a podium, but in a women's group like this, I will, because God does good work, and recovery works. And it is through the power that I found in the Al-Anon family programs and sponsorship that I have been able to do these things. That I've taken the journey from the kid who was read about in what Kathy read. I didn't necessarily, you know, what I got here, my core belief and what I had been taught by the family disease of alcoholism is that my needs were bad and wrong. My core message was, I am too much and I am a burden. That's what I really believed. And I thought that I was damaged beyond any possibility of healing. And so when I got here and I started to learn about the fifth tradition, and Al-Anon's singleness of purpose, to help friends and families of alcoholics, I decided that my singleness of purpose is to heal. And it has been a lifetime journey. I have got a long, sad tale of woe. It is pitiful. I forget myself how bad my story is. Telling my story actually changes my brain chemistry. I've seen a readout of my brain activity before telling my story and after. I mean, it really takes me down. Child abuse continues to affect me every single day of my life. It affects the way I sleep. I had a sleep study some years ago, and I have these things called autonomic nervous system hyperarousal. And it's essentially fancy parlance for hypervigilance. The next beating, the next group of adults acting out sexually when I can hear it, the next time the police are called, the next time I stand on the stoop and wonder why the police aren't taking me with them, you know, the next time I try to save myself from the absolute, utter, and total hell of growing up in the family that I grew up in. So that I could end up at a place like Harvard and win the Dean Scholar Award for a paper, that I could graduate with a 3.9, damn Sophia Gruskin for giving me a B+. In health and human rights of all things. And I'm applying to graduate school. I'm applying to the #1 PhD program in the country in the area of my choosing. And, you know, the places I've gone, I never thought that a kid like me could end up with a life like this. And when I sit where you are and I'm introduced from podiums like this and they read my bio, I'm like, who are they talking about? I mean, I'm impressed with my damn self. And it's because God does good work, right? It really is. And what I am is willing. And that doesn't make me good, right, and perfect. It just makes me willing. And it means that I've had sponsors who showed me what willingness looks like. And that thing about being here today, one of the many has told me many beautiful things, including, you know, I can't pretend to care. I can pretend to care, but I can't pretend to show up. And if I don't show up, people don't remember why I didn't show up. They just remember I didn't show up. And that's been something I've wrestled with in my recovery, because I do have a very capacious life with a lot of opportunities and commitments. And in Al-Anon, I was telling Kathy, we have another acronym for ODAT. Do I have the opportunity to do this? Do I have the desire to do it? Do I have the ability to do it? And do I have the time? And in my case, it's often, yes, do everything. Yes, I can. And so I go back to that fifth tradition and my singleness of purpose. Will it help me heal? And after 10 years, my recovery birthday is the 6th of February, 2006. I feel that just this past spring, my singleness of purpose has shifted from that healing really to helping. And we do have the H's in Al-Anon. It's kind of this informal thing, the H's, where I go from hurting to healing to helping. And really today my life is very much defined by helping, but I always got to help myself first, right? Self-care is not selfish, it is self-esteem. So that's a little bit of what, and I do get laid on a somewhat regular basis, so my life is good in that way too. So yeah, we've got to talk about romance. HIV tests, people, HIV tests, always, always, always. Doesn't matter if you've known them for a long time. So I'll tell you a little bit about the childhood, and last night when I was going to sleep, it was painful. It's like really painful when I think about opening that back up. And it's not the worst childhood in the world, but it is mine, and I will defend how bad it was. And that's one of the things, too, that we learn in Al-Anon literature. I brought my little basket with you. I love my basket. So this is my cowl that I tote around my house. This is what I use in the morning to practice step 11. And by the way, I've made a deal with God. It's a pretty different deal than the pre-recovery foxhole prayer deals. Like if they would only ... prayers. My deal with God today is, please take all of my thoughts, whatever they are, and convert them into a prayer. Just take the raw material, even if it's bullshit, just whatever's going on in my head, and please make that a prayer. And when someone pops into mind, and I don't even register that I'm thinking about someone, would you please make that a prayer for that person? And my other favorite prayer is I literally take the language of step 11, and I say, may so-and-so have knowledge of your will for her. May she have the power to carry that out. I love to pray for people that way. So I do believe that the family disease of alcoholism is intergenerational, and that was my experience. And I loved what was said last night. The disease is actually a spiritual malady. And by that definition, I have a spiritual malady that lies to me and tells me I don't have a spiritual malady. And the great delusion is that I am separate from you. That is the lie that I believe. And that is the lie that alcoholism taught me, that I was separate. And, my mother and my sister got all grouped up and did that sick, enmeshed, twisted thing that they did. And there was a self-preservation instinct in me that looked in that and said, I don't know what that is, but I don't want any part of it. That will absolutely take me down. And so as a result, I was completely abandoned and neglected. And when I say abandoned and neglected, I mean unabridged dictionary, criminal abandonment and neglect. There were 2 years as a child when I lived entirely by myself. And I could sit down right there, and you could just ponder on that. I mean that literally. I was in the 10th grade, and they left to do the thing that they were going to do, and they just left me home. And I lived on Del Rio Pike in Franklin, Tennessee, Williamson County, in a clapboard Victorian farmhouse by myself for an entire year. I have huge stretches of memory blackouts, which I hear a lot of people in these rooms share. I still don't know where I got money or how I got food. And at the end of that year, I thought, well, I should probably find some grown-up somewhere to do something for me. And so this person who was allegedly supposed to look after me, I guess, this boy called Steven that my sister had been going out with, he came over because I moved myself to a different state. I was 14 and 15 years old when this happened. It is a miracle that I am alive. A miracle that I am alive. And, I wanted to look like I had a lot of stuff, and so I put my things in, those cardboard boxes that are printed with flowers, and I had a lot of them because I wanted to look like I had stuff. And we put that in the back of his truck, and he's like, well, there's only 3 things in here. You only need 1 box. So we took 1 box, and we drove to Lexington, Kentucky. And I remember to this day what it felt like sitting at the intersection of New Circle Road and Tate's Creek Pike and looking to turn left to go up the hill to a little apartment at Merrick apartment complex where my dad lived, and I thought, oh shit. It was a literal and figurative turning point. And we drove up that hill, and Stephen dropped me off, and I saw my dad, and he began to do something called surrogate spousing. This language is in Al-Anon literature. It's a book called From Survival to Recovery. It's about growing up in an alcoholic home. That's also where I got the language of how I played that role of the lost child in the family. Fantasy, separateness, wild imaginings. And my dad really loved me. And I want to make sure I sober my parents up. Like I emotionally sober them up. And this is what I want to say about anonymity. You absolutely have my permission to tell my story. Get it right? You absolutely do not have my permission to tell anyone else's story. It is their story. Their reality is very different from my reality, and I will come find you. I will track you down. Don't do my moves on you. Because today I can give my parents the dignity and respect that they deserve, even though they were predators when I was a child. That is the miracle of Al-Anon. I can prosecute and I can forgive at the same time, and I'm here to tell you, I have. So my dad began to light candles and call me lover. It was really gross, and I think that yuck is as good a clinical definition of sexual abuse as anything else, ugh. And he would cuddle me, and it was absolutely repugnant for me. So maybe the alternative was better. He put $50 in an envelope and left the state for the year. And I admire him and his honesty, because what he has shared with me since then, since my recovery started, and here's the other thing I've learned in Al-Anon, my recovery can only carry other people so far. And then they got to do the deal, or I've got to hit a new level of detachment and surrender and grief of letting them go. Because that flush when they're floating on my recovery is pretty exhilarating. But he's told me that he would wait for me to go to bed at night, and then he would go into his room, push all the furniture in front of the door, and stay up and drink and use cocaine. And he got himself dry, and he said he would have these nightmares of literal hefty garbage bags full of coke, and he'd just be going brrr. So, he left the state, and I was by myself. And that was a little worse because the school I attended didn't have buses. And it was a private school. And you know what I realized last night? And that's why this process is gentle. I came at my early recovery. I didn't work for the first year. I'm thankful I had the financial means to do so. But that's also how sick I was. I needed just to recover for the first year. And I very slowly started to work again. When I was in treatment and we were in an art group and we were asked to draw the body part that bothered us most, I drew my brain. Right? I drew my brain. I was a haunted woman, and I had so many tracks going on in there at the same time, and I remember processing this one piece of art where it was like a radio dial, and it was just all these competing stations, and this is how it felt, right? And I've done some art, which is it's a wonderful tool for me. I still draw sometimes with my non-dominant hand. The violence that gets put on the paper when I draw. And that's what child abuse looks like between the ears of a kid, right? It's really ugly stuff. And I was realizing last night that I have this recurrent memory of myself at that school, and I have on these cream, they're not quite culottes. They were a little chicer than culottes, thank you very much. But I just was and I see myself, and what I see is this. And I'm like, oh, I'm disassociated. It's another disassociation memory. And part of what Many has taught me, my second sponsor, is that in Al-Anon, and on occasion with the appropriate outside help, I can heal the memories without needing to know what happened. I can heal the memories without needing to know what happened. Now, why I am disassociated and seeing myself down a hallway and really what I see is my crotch, probably not a great memory. I probably don't need to go there, but I can use the steps, the traditions, and the concepts to heal it. And I do believe that in my higher power's hands, it becomes of service to another human being. So thankfully, my Nana took me in after that year, and I kept all these secrets. Like why I didn't tell anyone, I don't know. And I believe, some people don't necessarily understand this, but I would think it would be abusive to come to me and say, well, why didn't you just tell anybody? It's like, well, why don't you understand the family disease of alcoholism? Because we keep secrets. Anyway, my Nana took me in, and finally in the 12th grade, I was fed, I was watered, I had a safe place to stay, my gym clothes were washed on Friday afternoons, I had a Miami Vice calendar in my closet, and it was good, it was good. I went from failing geometry to graduating 8th in my class. What a little love can do for a kid like me. And let me just tell you why I continue to so robustly work this program as if my life depends on it. When I'm home, I attend a meeting every day. My Nana is in the loony bin, and she's in the loony bin this time because most recently she pulled the fire alarm because she wanted to give the firefighter some donuts. And the first time because she kept calling 911 for them to bust her out of the old folks' home. And the 911 was like, Polly? So that's when she switched to the fire department. And in recovery, isn't the disease funny? Isn't it great to be able to laugh, right? And it's not so funny when I'm living in the disease. And I love my Nana. And, my amends to her, actually fits with the Bonnie Raitt song because I tried to suck blood from a stone before I worked the program. And, that stone was actually my Nana. Why wouldn't I? Because she loved me. I mean, she literally saved my life. Okay, I was going to say something about masturbating, but I'm not going to say that right now. I don't know why. Anyway, let me just say, my Nana is a very natural, down-to-earth person, right? We had very open conversations about anything. She would watch British comedy and laugh so hard she fell off the sofa. I mean, she's a really cool chick. And I would just write her these bleating, pleading letters, trying to figure out why she suddenly rejected me when I was older, when I started my career. And my sponsor, my direction to her was, you give her a good letting alone. You get off her back, you get out of her way, you get into the steps, get to a meeting, and get on with your own life. And so my motive changed. And eventually I was given permission to start writing my Nana again, but with a totally different, for fun and for free reason. So that's an interesting shift. And that's why Al-Anon is a subtle language. By the way, I hated Al-Anon when I got here. Oh my God. I mean, the Al-Anon salute. Hated, y'all. I mean, because what I did at my very first meeting was read a professional recovery author, because the topic from her book for the day coincided with the topic at the Al-Anon meeting. And because it was a healthy, principled meeting, the mother of a chairperson interrupted me and said, by the way, during this 1 hour, we only share Al-Anon literature. And I said, well, I'm going to AA. Don't you know, I've been to the best treatment center in North America, and they treat all addictions, and there are no phones. So I went to open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because I knew I needed and wanted recovery. And that is a part of the Al-Anon suggestion. Go to open meetings of AA. And I went to at least 2 AA meetings based on AA literature a week. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Maureen and then maybe get back to why I got back into, why I did, anyway, you'll see what happens. So there were little people along the way, and Maureen is kind of little actually. There were small incidents along the way growing up that saved my life, that kept me alive, where it's kind of true, right? I got the grease off a thumbprint, like a cockroach. I just got a little bit of something of nurturing or attention that would keep me alive. And when I moved into that apartment in the 11th grade and my dad buggered off, I ran out of clean clothes, and there was not a washer or dryer, and of course I wasn't living in my mom's house anymore, so we didn't have the wringer washer and the thing, because we were supposed to be all hillbilly and whatever. And so I looked around I looked around this apartment complex, and I thought, well, where am I going to get my wash done? And I could see from my patio a woman in a bikini and a sun hat, and she smoked, and I thought, well, that's glamorous. And I figured out which door was hers, and I knocked on it, and I said, I'm Ashley, could I please do my laundry? And her name is Maureen Sullivan. And she has, at this time, over 30 years of continuous sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that time, she had 5 years, and her sponsor had just said to her, Maureen, just ask your higher power to teach you how to love for fun and for free. And I knocked on her door, and Maureen tells me to this day still that I was her gift from God. So I would come home, and Maureen would listen to me. She had Cinemax, so she was very rich, and that meant a lot to me. She came to me one day and said, I think there's a problem of alcoholism in your family. And I said, well, do something. And she said, I can carry the message, but I can't carry the person. And she gave me her big book to read. I even read the appendices. I read William James. And then she asked for her book back. She said, I need it. She took me to a couple of meetings. But how and why I did not know that the Al-Anon family groups existed, and how and why it took me until the age of 37 to get here, I know not. And that is one of the reasons why I tell my story publicly often. And I'm able to do so with that distinction between public information and letting everyone know that Al-Anon exists, and it's here for anyone who feels they have been affected by a problem drinker. And why I maintain my personal anonymity at the public level, including social media. And the first time I told my story publicly, my grant sponsor called the editor of the magazine to talk about public anonymity. And that letter that AA publishes to the media, it comes out every January 1st from your general service office, is a very good explanation of that. And so what there's my personal story, and I tell it in a general way. Always recognize the little buzzwords, right? But then the outlet itself, not me, the outlet can provide the names and the web address and phone numbers and things like that. You know, and I can say, what book are you reading right now? Oh, I'm reading How Al-Anon Works for Friends and Families of Alcoholics. It's subtle, and I'm not saying I am a member of the Al-Anon family groups. You know, there have been very few changes in our literature over the years. And in Al-Anon, to change anything in our legacies, it would require 3/4 of all the groups on the planet providing written consent. It's not going to happen. I had to break up with the home group because they wouldn't do something, blah, 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 you know, and anyway. So we do have a revised pamphlet on why anonymity, and explains anonymity at the level of social media. And WSO asks that we follow Al-Anon on Twitter. We just retweet what they tweet. We don't add our own, hey, this is great. My husband just relapsed. But one of the changes that has been made to our basic text is we used to say in the suggested welcome, Al-Anon is an anonymous fellowship. No, it's not. Anonymity is an important principle. Individuals are asked to maintain personal anonymity. The fellowship itself is not anonymous. And really where I stand with my anonymity is it's tradition 8. Al-Anon is non-professional. So what I do professionally is none of your business. What you do professionally is none of my business. If we choose to talk about it outside the group, super. But there's no place for it in the rooms of the Al-Anon family groups. So that's why I don't talk about my profession. Although it's been, you know, good to me, and I was at the top and had no idea because I hurt so much on the inside. I valued my career very little. Anyway, Maureen, I told you about that. Now what am I going to tell you? You want to hear about my marriage? Oh, let me tell you how I got to treatment. That was kind of an interesting story, and how I was 37 before this happened. And like most people, I had tried some therapy, and all of that I experienced as very abusive. There are beautiful modalities and therapists out there. In my case, it was the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem. And what I learned when I got here is it is abusive to talk about the problem without highlighting the solution. And what I got here is a spiritual solution that works under all causes and conditions, including the most sordid places on earth. So my sibling went to treatment. And none of us knew that compulsive overeating was a disease. I thought she liked to snack. She had candy in one pocket, usually a shitting puppy in the other. This is just the way she lived. And, I look back, and I went into her hotel room once, and there were these little bottles on the room service tray, and I was like, oh, she's drinking in the morning. I was very frightened. And I walked over, and they were little maple syrup bottles. And you know what I know now? She was drinking in the morning. It was her drug of choice. So she had some great outside help, and she wanted to go to a cooking school, which is a wonderful idea for an addict. You get to work with your substance all day long. It's like going to the cocoa plantation to heal your coke addiction, working in the alcohol factory. And she went to a really great place that does, in fact, treat all addictions. And what they did at that place was, as I like to say, it doesn't matter what got a person to the front porch. Once you step through the screen door, they treated the gnawing in the soul. They treated the underlying thingy, that rattling, the ghost rattling inside. So I went to her family week. I didn't necessarily want to, but I did. I got talked into it, and then, of course, tried to talk everybody else to go. And the moral of the story is, at the end of the week, they did an intervention on me. And Tenny M. had joined the Al-Anon family groups in 1968. And she recognized in me that I had been absolutely shattered by this disease. And the pain had started to come up during that week. And I identified with the clients. I would sit in group and hold hands with them, and I was shaking. And I felt like live electric wires was being touched to my skin, and I was calling it these tsunamis. I was having body memories and literal convulsions. And I was so ashamed of my pain. I was choking on it. And they also told me that my rage preceded me into a room, that before I put my hand on the doorknob, it was like, and I did the anger for my whole family. I was eaten alive with rage. I went to an open AA speaker meeting recently, and they talked about insomnia and anxiety, and all that. Well, shit, I had that, and I never took a drink. I mean, it's how I lived. And so at the end of that week, when they were making their suggestions to family members, Sex Addicts Anonymous for you, and teaching us about how to stay out of her plate, and Al-Anon and all this stuff, they saved the best for last. And they said, Ashley, we'd like to invite you to stay. And I said, yeah, I'll come back and do one of your 6-day retreat things. I'd read about it in the book, I'd answered all the questionnaires. I don't gamble, don't have any debt. I read the Dear Abby columns that were in there about this and that, and I did the alcohol questionnaire, answered yes to less than 3 questions, changing a few answers to make sure it was less than 3 answers that were yes. I remember that dial I told you about. My whole family just fell out in that Southern way. That expression? They just fell out. Oh my God, you're so skinny, you're anorexic. Oh my God, you have so many problems. And I'm like, you're my fucking problem, people. They were really irritating. So basically, they were so irritating, I couldn't stand to look at them anymore. So I turned my head over here. And who did the God of my understanding have sitting right there but Tenny M? And she just looked at me. You know how they do, they just look at us like we understand as perhaps few others can. And something came out of her that I just wanted. I didn't even know what it was, right? It was peace, and it was serenity, and she witnessed my reality. She acknowledged that it had been what it had been, and that it was pretty awful. And I couldn't even speak. I just nodded at her. And it was like this giant cosmic hand turned the volume in the room down, and everything went so quiet and so still. And I just went like this. I just went. And that was my surrender. That was my yes. That's when I said, okay, I'll stay. The pain of staying the same is finally so great. It's got to be less than the pain of being willing to change. So I left the room and I went to the B&B where I was staying, and I packed my little suitcase and I called my outside help, and he was really excited for me about this. And I was already starting to bargain. It took 2 blocks. Oh, I can do this at home. Oh, I've learned about the program, blah, 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 blah. And because he was excited for me, and he literally said, I have wanted this for you since the day I met you. And he asked my permission to tell his wife, which I granted. And the last thing I heard the good Dr. K say was, Margie, you'll never guess what's happened. And when I was wanting to kill my fool self in 47 days of inpatient treatment, I would think about his voice and say, I really don't know why, but for some reason he's happy for me. And in this moment, I do not believe, but I do believe that he believes. So I took that little suitcase into the center, and my step 0 was this shit has got to stop, and my step 1 was on suicidal ideation and a self-harm addiction. Can't keep any secrets in that place. And I also wrote what we called for short an autobiography. And everyone was able to listen what it was like for me growing up in that family system, which was very different from everyone else. And I will always remember sharing some of my step work, because it's a 12-step based center, about like voicemail behavior. And I'm sitting there with dope fiends and women who have just exited human trafficking. And I said, okay, so I call and I leave a message, and it's really chipper and friendly because I want it to be warm and appealing. And then I talk about how great work is, because I really want you to come see me at work, and you'll have a lot of fun when you come here, and I'll get your turkey sandwich for you that I know you're liking, some video games. And then say, well, you were supposed to call me yesterday, but you didn't, so I'll kind of go into all of everything you did wrong. And then just to make sure it was clear, I'll summarize it in a very pithy way, but then circle back to how charming and appealing and wonderful I am. Bye. And I might have to play those back 14 or 72 times to make sure it sounds right. Literally, one night before the biggest job up to that time I'd ever had, I was up all night, obsessively playing a message back to make sure that I'd gotten it right. Powerless, really powerless, very emotionally unmanageable. And them dope fiends are sitting there looking at me. I've got a bulimic who's wanting to purge, compulsive overeater who's crying because she can't get a snack, and an anorexic who's angry, and they're like, we are so glad you're here. And even the spiritual director asked if I needed meds. I really had a resentment against that. So I came home, I went to that Al-Anon meeting, and it was suggested that Maureen S. be my first sponsor. Yes, she was a member of AA, I was going to Al-Anon, but they said someone who knows you and who can just help bridge you to getting a sponsor who will help you work all 3 legacies of Al-Anon. And as I said, I went to that meeting, and I got a resentment, and I got a lot out of the AA meetings I went to. And then Granny Pat, who was Manny's sponsor and spiritual director, in an offhand way one day said, why isn't Ashley going to Al-Anon? Well, I couldn't get to Al-Anon fast enough because I love me some Granny Pat. And I identified with the alcoholic last night. She took her first drink at age 5. It was 4 Roses whiskey from her granddad's truck in West Texas, and she's been a really profound influence on my life. So I finally started to go back, and I was ready to hear that subtle language that is Al-Anon, that language of the heart. And I got a home group, and it was interesting because at that time, the people who'd been there a while all left for various reasons. So there was another woman, Brenda B., and suddenly we became the trusted servants for that meeting. We became the institutional memory of the group conscience, and we were able to do some really great things and get business meetings going up again, and making sure that we had a great supply of conference-approved literature. We made sure we were studying a fresh book every Wednesday night. We went through so much literature together. And one of the things that we also did was we changed the way we closed that particular meeting. It's called Keep It Simple in Franklin. And at that time, the meeting closed with the Lord's Prayer. And I have an opinion, and it's just that, it's an opinion. And that's one of the gifts that's come true for me in Al-Anon, is I can have my opinion without being combative about it. And I stand for things without standing against my fellows. And it's the grace of the power that I have found in the program that has allowed me to do that with dignity and respect, as Many always says, dignity and respect. And I suggested that we consider a non-sectarian and non-religious affiliated prayer, and that we close with Al-Anon's responsibility declaration. And it was a tough decision for the group. You know, Lois and the founders, when we have our next Al-Anon International Convention, the closings will be seated, hands in laps, and a moment of silence. That's how the founders closed. And, you know, the Lord's Prayer, as it's called, has been used in meetings a lot. They do not close with those prayers in India. And I just went to 2 meetings in Istanbul, and they do not close with that prayer in Istanbul. And I went to a meeting in Copenhagen, and in Belgium, and in Congo. You get the idea. But that preamble is important to me. You know, it's not affiliated with any sect, any denomination, any institution, any politics, any organization. And it was so painful for Brenda, and I was sponsoring her at the time, and I saw her willingness to accept the outcome of a group conscience that really hurt her. And she was able to conform. I've actually just said something incorrect. Has anybody caught it? There is no such thing as a group conscience. It's actually 3 words. It's an informed group conscience. And because it was an informed group conscience, she very graciously accepted it. And that brings me to boundaries. We talk a lot in Al-Anon and boundaries, right? Let me just tell you this. I can be very aggressive. I am a perpetrator. I violate people's boundaries. I'm not just here to figure out how to set and maintain healthy boundaries and stay safe from people. I act out, right? And that is taking responsibility for my own behavior. Just like it says in that blue book, I'm responsible for my own pain. I'm also responsible for my own inappropriate behavior. And boundaries in Al-Anon has taught me that can I, during that 1 hour, just use literature that Al-Anon publishes? Can I, during that 1 hour when I'm traveling, accept the group I'm attending is autonomous and do it their way? Can I follow the suggestions and keep my mouth closed? That's been very good for me. And I am that person who speaks up in meetings if I feel that the meeting is off track or if outside literature is brought in. And what I will do is be real honest and say, I'm really scared to do this. I can feel my hands starting to sweat. It's very difficult to do. I would love to visit with you after the meeting. And I will probably read something from Al-Anon literature about it. So I've got some pages tagged about why we only use conference-published literature, why we don't discuss specific religious affiliation. That's in our obstacles to success. And I'll keep it really brief. But I've learned how to do that, and I'm comfortable with that. Not everybody is. And of course, my hope is that it's non-shaming, and I can't really control what another person, how they experience that. But this is my litmus test. I will look around the meeting, and if there is a newcomer present, I feel like I must, because it may be the only Al-Anon meeting they ever attend. They may repeat that behavior at another meeting, and if there aren't newcomers present, I can defer it until later. So I'm going to tell you about my hot marriage, but I didn't actually turn the timer on. Where am I with time, please? Well, this I know. So I was married for 14 years. I now have a husband and a wife-in-law, and we have a baby. So and this is where also becomes sensitive for me, because these are other people's stories and you really don't have permission to repeat those. And I want to be honest with you and tell you what it was really like. So there was a part of me that loved being married, and I also really hated it. I mean, I wanted out, and I wanted out bad. And I really wanted out from the beginning. I almost ran from the ceremony. Like, oh, no, everyone will really understand. We'll just have a nice party. I was not feeling hopeful about this. And there were times even before the marriage when I wanted out, and I frankly just didn't have the guts and the self-esteem to say, So I made a run of it, you know. No major changes for the first year, no major changes for the first 5 years. And I just listened to Many. You stay and become different. You work the program and become different. You practice these principles in all your affairs. And the enigma in a riddle, stay until you can stay. Stay until you can stay. And today I understand what that means. I really can't explain it. Again, it's experiential. And she warned me about indifference. And we talk about this in Al-Anon literature. You know, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifferent. And when I started to become indifferent, I got scared. That was very frightening to me because I love and adore that man. My inner child is very safe with him. His inner child is very safe with me. That's what we shared, and that's why it was so sacred and so precious. Our adults, other than the sex, didn't have a whole lot going on. His world was great big, and I loved his world, and I was very good in his world. I could show up. I learned how to be appropriate in his world and not, be demanding and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. I mean, we did really spectacular, unusual things together. I got to be a part of things that are so rare. And he would not come to my trailer and eat that turkey sandwich and play those video games. He just couldn't do it. And the growth for me, and again, this is that subtle Al-Anon language. I took the journey from you really should to, oh, you can't, to this is what I need and want, and my needs are valid and appropriate. And for whatever reason at this time, it's really none of my business, you're unable to meet those needs, and it was drained of controversy, it was drained of opinion, it was drained of anything punitive. And it was such love and such dignity and such cohesion. And so different from move out, come back, let's go, all the things that I did over the years. And then I started to die because I was staying and could stay, but there was a very subtle yet ineffable, powerful part of me that was drowning. And I had a dream. I had two dreams. One was we were in a pool, and it was very sensual, not sexual, but very sensual and skin to skin. And I was on my back floating in the pool, and he was lying on top of me, and it was just all that sweet, juicy stuff that we had. And eventually, during the dream, I'm like, I'm not breathing. I wonder when I'll breathe. I wonder what my lung capacity is. And so I'm having this sort of ruminative thought about, And so I start slowly to exhale to float up to the surface, and I can see the oxygen bubbles, but where I ended up was still submerged. And my thinking was, I've got just a little bit of one nostril. Maybe I can get a little breath. And that was the dream, and I woke up and I was like, it's time. It's time. And I had another dream about a little bird in a bird cage. And she flew out and she came and she spoke to me. And it was from images that I had seen earlier in the day. And bird is slang for girl. And when I was processing the dream, I said, the bird broke free from the cage of Scottish life. Because my beloved is Scottish. The bird broke free from the cage of Scottish life. And so I stayed a little longer, and then one day he came to me and he's like, I see what you've been talking about. I get it. And we were where we got married, and it was our anniversary, and we closed our marriage together. We grieved, we hugged, we cried, we stood on the very place where we had said our vows. We created new vows as family. We said we were going to do this differently. We didn't expect anybody to understand. And that would come up over the years. You'd say, people don't understand. They don't have to. No, it's our business. Nobody needs to know. And it was very difficult. And that's what sponsorship and some other wise people to whom I look for spiritual direction said. There's reasons why people don't do it this way, because it's really, really hard. You don't defer the grief. You don't crap in the nest. You don't cut the ties. I mean, we would still sleep on the bed together, feet here, head there, covers, no covers, and just unbelievable unbelievable intimacy. And that's another thing that many taught me. Intimacy happens above the neck. And then he started to date. Hard. So I said something on social media, and he texted me, and he said, if you don't mind, I'm uncomfortable with that. Please don't do it. My outside help said he's dating, and I said, fuck you. He would never do that. He came home, and he said, I'm seeing somebody. It was so hard for both of us. But the good news is that we were both so grounded and so committed and so present. He'd be like, oh my God, I'm sick to my stomach. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to fucking kill you. We'd be like, we even did that together. We did that together, and he'd be like, oh, I'm so dizzy. And I'd say, clearly, and, and then he had this really massive accident. And I just knew. I saw one thing on my phone, and I was like, I got to go to Texas. And I did some really radical things to get there as fast as I could. And when he woke up, he said, I knew you would be the first person I saw. But I had to do really uncomfortable things, like stand there and go, like his brother was like, wait a minute, you're not the next of kin now, I am. It was really hard. But I did everything I'd always done those 14 years, right? And went to an Al-Anon meeting, and you want to talk about one of those classic snot-slinging cries. I mean, I slathered the table. I was howling the entire time. But even there, I knew how to take care of myself. I exercised every day. I called my sponsor, and I left that trauma unit to go to an Al-Anon meeting every single day. And then he came to his senses, and he dumped that woman. And then got somebody knocked up. And that was hard too, because we had chosen not to have children. And part of my, the story I told myself was that my social justice values were a part of the reason why, and it really doesn't matter. But he came home. It's still his home. It will always be his home. And we'd been together all day long, and then he was really wanting to talk to me, and I was taking some kids out for ice cream and to go to my Tuesday night 6 o'clock meeting. And I could just tell, and I was, and I said, are you getting married? And he went, and I said, knocked up. And he said, and then he said, will you please be the godmother? And I said, of course I will. Of course I will. And I hugged him, and then I left. And I left the most blistering, paint-peeling, you're never going to mother if I can believe message ever on my Recovery Buddies voicemail. And I went straight to a meeting, and I trusted anonymity, and I told the part of the story that for myself in that moment I needed to tell. And when the baby was born, I was there on her 4th day. She's adorable. She looks exactly like me. And we have a great time. We have a great time. My wife-in-law, I have a great deal of respect for her. She's very smart. And the reason I could do this was because of Al-Anon, and because of sponsorship, and because of the weird, miraculous stories I read in our literature. And I said, I will do whatever it takes to stand shoulder to shoulder with another beautiful, smart, powerful woman. I don't care if it feels like my skin is being peeled off me at times. I will stand in dignity with a sister. And when he says, hey babe, and we both say yes, we just laugh, we just laugh. And I recently welcomed her to the house for the first time, and it was, how can I be of service? I put a sign up that said welcome, and I thought, set aside, just teach me how to welcome her and let her set the tone and set the pace and do everything that she needs to do for this home to be a safe place where she can keep coming back for the rest of her life and however many teen children they're going to have now. God does good work. So my relationships aren't necessarily intact with family members, but I have peace about those relationships. And an example of Al-Anon at work in my life is I had a birthday in April, and one of the alcoholics I adore sent me a text at the end of the day. I had a kickball party. And they sent me a text at the end of the day, and we're neighbors, and they said, "Hope you had a nice birthday with your family." And on her birthday, I wrote, "I love you so much. I hope your day was everything you wanted it to be. And I had a dream about you the other night, and her name when she was little was Chrissy." And I said, in my dream, your name Chrissy came up, and the word association was the love of my life. I can't do that on my unaided will. I am powerless to manufacture that kind of grace and that kind of forgiveness. My 8-step list was actually 4 columns. We talk about 3 columns in our literature. 1, I'd be delighted to make amends now. 2nd column, I'll get there. And the 3rd column is the hell no, but not no column. And then I found out there's actually a 4th one, which is I don't know them amends. But by working the program without my permission, all those people migrated over to the willing column. And this is again that subtle Al-Anon language of the heart where I've made amends to people who have hurt me, which is not, hey, what you did was okay. It was for me. I hit a bottom with my dad a couple years ago, and it was a pretty painful one. And I thought I might not ever see him again, and I stood and I looked him in the eye, and I said, I would like to offer you my heartfelt amends for any and all wrongs I may have done. And when I made my amends to my mom, I was willing for a while, and it was like a big thing amongst my recovery. Did you do it? And I said, no, the TV was on. Did you do it? Pop was there. And then there's that feeling, right? It's like that, oh my God, this is it, it's time. And the piece of literature that really blew that wide open for me, I'd like to read it to you. I have a very sweet and very tender relationship with my mother today. And when I came into these rooms, it wasn't a question if. I didn't love her. I did not love her. I don't have a single good memory from childhood. For example, there's a home movie of me at a birthday party, and I turn a cartwheel, and after the cartwheel, hug her. That's as close as I can get, looking at an image. We shared a bed when I was in the 3rd grade, and what I make up is that I loved sleeping with my mom when I was in the 3rd grade. And I have to make that up. And Minnie and I talked about that a lot. She said, you're going to have to make some of these things up from your imagination. And she has come some to program with me, and there was a night we were in my home group, and the 2 of us were cleaning up the room and setting up. And it doesn't mean that she works this program or has a sponsor, but it was a pretty precious moment for me. And she was crying. I thought about this. I haven't thought about it in a while, and I thought about it recently. I went over to her house, and she was sitting in the driveway with the car door open, and she was slumped forward, and her forehead was on the steering wheel, and her face was slack, and she just had, tears and snot and saliva coming out of everywhere, and she was limp and hopeless and completely and utterly shattered and destroyed. And I thought, I've been there. I know what that feels like. And I was able to collect her from the car and put her in my car and drive her to a meeting. What this disease will do untreated to me is that I'll be pulling the fire alarm trying to give the fire department donuts. I'll be sucking on a tailpipe. You know, I need this program. I don't trivialize the ongoing effect of alcoholism on me. When I was at Harvard, I went to treatment for my spring break. I've had good remission from suicidal ideation, but for some reason something popped up, you know, and the next thing I knew, I was looking how to get a handgun permit in a liberal state, and it's hard. But what I did was I told people my story. I called student health. I called my outside help. I called one of my professors who was a psychologist. I didn't miss a class, and I went to an Al-Anon meeting every single day. And the reason I got to meetings was I was doing service, and I go to literature meetings. And I had started a meeting on campus, so of course I had to go to that. And it was a literature meeting, and I heard something I needed to hear, and there was a newcomer. And I said, well, I'll meet you at a meeting tomorrow. So of course I had to go, and then the next meeting I had a service position. I was the secretary, so I had to go. And the next thing I knew, I was in treatment. There's a willingness, right? Okay, I'm going to read you this little reading, and I'm assuming that somebody is keeping time because I really don't know. And I haven't even talked to you about why World Service Organization is not capitalized in Concept 1. Or why there's not a comma between discussion, vote. Are you feeling me? You feeling me? So my friend Kate, who's with me, she was in the car yesterday going, dork alert, dork alert, dork alert, because I've got a group text about punctuation. It matters. Because you can hear how dysfunctional it was. I didn't know how to do life. I've used this stuff in the boardroom talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. I've used this stuff with heads of state. It works. Like substantial unanimity. What does it mean to not be punitive in thought, action, and deed? It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. I highly recommend it. So this is November 14 from Hope for Today, which is written from the perspective of children of alcoholics. My sponsee and I were discussing how angry she was at having grown up in an alcoholic family. She asked me how I overcame my anger so I could have a loving adult relationship with my fill in the blank. Mom, with the world. This was not a woman who was at peace with the world. My views have remained the same. The way I go about it is very different. To explain, I took her on a mini journey through the 12 steps. First, I admitted I was powerless over my childhood. Period. The survival strategies I developed made my adult life unmanageable. Second, I came to believe that only my higher power could show me how a healthy adult behaves. Third, I made a decision to notice the people and situations my higher power put in my life to illustrate healthy behavior. Notice what you notice. Fourth, I inventoried my attitudes and actions that hindered me from having a better relationship with my mom. All the ways in which I'm defended. How can I be in this moment undefended? Not needing to add anything or take anything away. Just let the moment be what the moment is. Fifth, I admitted to God, to myself, and to my sponsor that my anger from the past prevented me from accepting the love my mom was able to offer today. Not the love I want, not the love I needed, the love she is able to offer today. Sixth and seventh, I became ready to have my defects removed. I love step 7. I love step 7. It's very touching to me. The next step was easy because I already knew my mom belonged on my 8th step list and I wanted to make amends. However, dredging up the past, instead, I decided to change my behavior by accepting her love and loving her in return. Putting away the cell phone at dinner, going to the mall to return a bra. Accept the love she has to give today. Accept the love the world has to give today. 10th, I examine my behavior every day to see how I've taken care of myself, to see if my actions stem from love. 11th, I ask my higher power to make me more loving, which I do believe is my higher power's will for me. 12th, I began carrying this message of healing by sharing my experience with others and showing how I broke out of old cycles. In my example, generations of family disease and mental illness and abuse and incest. By the way, I'm an incest and 3-time rape survivor. About that, I have no shame. I broke out of old cycles by living the steps one day at a time. Thought for the day. The 12 steps provide ways to live a new and different life. They help me to know and love myself. Hurting, healing, helping. I really love and value myself today. And what I love most about myself is the love that my higher power has for me that flows through me. And when I get that good stuff all over me, I feel so glorious and so empowered. And I owe it to Lois, and I owe it to Anne, and I owe it to everybody who created this beautiful program which I work today. So thank you so much for letting me love you.